Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Library and Information Science Student Association, welcome to tonight's presentation on contextualizing historical subject representation, identifying temporal concept drift for temporally aligned access points. My name is Christy Linder, and I am the current co-president of LISA, Rutgers's ALA student chapter. Among our goals, we aim to provide students with opportunities to make connections and share ideas. In the spirit of making connections, I want to especially welcome everyone attending from Drexel tonight and anyone else who may have joined from outside Rutgers's information science program. We're so glad to have you. Tonight's talk is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel if you would like to revisit it. I would ask, as I already have, if everyone could please mute your microphones during the talk. There will be time for Q&A afterward. Tonight's speaker is an old friend whom I am delighted to introduce. Sam Grabus is an information science PhD candidate at Drexel University's College of Computing and Informatics, where she also received her MSLIS in 2016. She is also a research assistant for Drexel's Metadata Research Center and project manager for the Leading Fellowship Program. Her primary research is centered on knowledge organization systems, relevance, and automated subject representation for humanities resources. Sam was awarded the 2020 Lita Ex Libris Student Writing Award for her paper evaluating the impact of the long S upon 18th century Encyclopedia Britannica automatic subject metadata generation results. And without further ado, Sam Grabus.
That title sounds a lot longer when somebody else says it. So I'm just going to share a screen. Okay, so as Christy said, my name is Sam Grabus, and I'm an information science PhD candidate at Drexel University in the College of Computing and Informatics. And Christy invited me to give a talk about my research for you. And first, she asked me to tell you a little bit about myself and about the experience of pursuing an information science PhD for somebody who may be considering it or just wants to know more. As Christy mentioned, I am a fourth-year information science PhD candidate and also research assistant at Drexel's Metadata Research Center, as well as project manager for the Leading Fellowship Program. I also received my master's degree from Drexel University in 2016. Prior to that were the lost years. And back in 2008, I received my bachelor's degree in English language and literature from Towson University. So just talking a little bit about what it's like to pursue an information science PhD, I thought it might be useful to talk about what the value of it has been for me, and also just some talking points, on how to pursue an information science PhD. For me, one of the biggest values is it's an opportunity to dig deeply into research topics that interest you. It's also self-driven research. And maybe the biggest advantage for me is just the opportunity to develop research, innovative solutions for practical information challenges. There's also the opportunity to write and publish journal and conference papers, which can lead to conference travel. For example, I've traveled to Montreal, Tallinn, Estonia, Berlin, Germany, and Utrecht in the Netherlands to present research and participate in conferences. And hopefully someday soon, I will continue to do so. There's also the advantage of making connections with professionals in your field, fellowship opportunities, and of course, to further develop your expertise. I feel like my expertise and research, my technical skills have really just exponentially increased throughout the PhD program. And in terms of how to pursue a PhD, for me, it was very much just making connections with professors plus happenstance. It led to a great opportunity. Sometimes faculty members will have a research grant that they were awarded and they need to bring a PhD student on board as a research assistant. So that's one potential avenue. And so making connections with professors is a good thing to do. And I do want to stress there that even in online master's programs, this is possible. I know that some people might be feeling like in their online coursework right now, they don't have that same connection that they're making with their faculty, with their professors. But I did my entire master's program online because I was also working full time. And I still was able to make these connections, and that led directly to entering the PhD program. So if you have a specific research area in mind and you're considering pursuing a PhD, it might be a good idea to identify a few researchers within this area and find out, well, what types of specific topics have they published about, and also where do they teach? So moving on to the presentation itself, the title is Contextualizing Historical Subject Representation, Identifying Temporal Concept Drift for Temporally Aligned Access Points. So starting with the idea of historical subject representation, more and more historical resources are digitized and added to digital library collections for scholarly study, but finding them requires good metadata. And topical access is typically provided through controlled vocabularies like the Library of Congress subject headings. One important note that I do want to add here is that this is not to say that natural language keywords can't be added as well. And one example of a digital library that has implemented both is the University of North Texas Portal to Texas History. They use both natural language keywords and controlled vocabulary terms as complementary approaches for representing these documents. So these are not mutually exclusive approaches. And here's just a really quick example of a 19th century to earliest 20th century digital library collection, the Mark Twain Online Project out of UC Berkeley. And I use this example because they do a really fantastic job at digitizing these letters. They include explanatory and textual commentary, original formatting, etc. I mean, I really love how thorough they were with this collection. But there's no topical metadata. There's no option for browsing these letters by topic. Subject headings are traditionally added manually by information professionals. But if your document collection, such as this collection, is too big, then automated or semi-automated approaches are necessary. And this is a prominent challenge for digital humanities collections. So the digital collection that I'll be discussing today comes from the 19th Century Knowledge Project, which is a collaborative project between Dr. Peter Logan at Temple University's Loretta C. Duckworth Scholar Studio, which was previously known as the Digital Scholarship Center, and Drexel's Metadata Research Center. And Peter's goals for digitizing these he wants to completely digitize these 4 historical editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 3rd, 7th, 9th, and 11th editions, which were published between 1797 and 1911. He started with the digital scans for each page, PDF, JP2, TIFF, JPEG, whatever available scan was the highest resolution as available through Google Books. But the quality of the optical character recognition output originally generated for these pages was too poor to use. So each page is reprocessed with OCR software such as Abbey Fine Reader, and a ton of work goes into correcting the OCR output, separating the pages by its individual encyclopedia entries, and converting the TEI XML, converting them into TEI XML. And the end goal for these 4 editions is over 100,000 individual TEI XML files, one for each entry. So beyond digitization, there's a long-term goal for the project, and there's also a short-term goal. The long-term goal for the project is to analyze how knowledge changed over time through this authoritative source of 19th century knowledge. And I use the word authoritative here very loosely to mean that it was considered authoritative from this particular perspective, written by Western colonial Protestant heterosexual able-bodied men. I don't think women contributed until the 11th edition, I think, but don't quote me on that. And the short-term goal, where the Metadata Research Center has played a key role, is automatic subject metadata creation for integration into the TEI XML headers for each of these 113,000 encyclopedia entries. So if you see here on the right-hand side, here's an example of how subject metadata terms can be added into the TEI headers for these. So one approach to this short-term goal is through automatic subject indexing. And there are many different approaches to automatic subject indexing, some of which are supervised machine learning approaches. But the particular approach that I'm discussing today is subject indexing with string matching to controlled vocabulary terms. So this diagram provides an overall idea of how this particular approach can be applied. You have your input text, which is normalized and matched to normalized, which is normalized, and then it is matched to normalized keywords in your selected target vocabulary, which then produces your output. But we need a tool to accomplish this. Well, the Metadata Research Center just so happens to have a tool that can accomplish this. It's called HIVE, which stands for Helping Interdisciplinary Vocabulary Engineering. It's a linked open data vocabulary server, which offers an automatic subject indexing feature, allowing you to match your terms to multiple controlled vocabularies. So your document file first undergoes several steps of natural language processing, including natural language keyword extraction, term ranking, and term normalization. And then a SQL query with wildcard characters matches the terms to your normalized controlled vocabulary terms. And your output will be controlled vocabulary terms that match during this process. So I'll give a brief demonstration of how HIVE works. This text that you see here is the entire entry for a 9th edition Encyclopedia Britannica entry on radiata, which is a term created by an early 19th century French naturalist named Cuvier, who is apparently sometimes referred to as the founding father of paleontology. And here's the user interface for the indexing portion of the HIVE online demo version, which shows you how to select your vocabularies up here, upload your document, or you can use a URL, adjust a few key parameter sliders, and hit OK to index. And here's an example of how HIVE displays the indexing output, which you'll see up here. You can view if you click on one of the terms, such as this first term in your record, you can view the authority record, which you see on the left here, for that particular term. And you can even save this term in a variety of different metadata formats, such as the Dublin core that is displayed here, or SCOS RDF, or JSON. One key challenge that was identified while working on this project is that the language of the controlled vocabulary can differ drastically from the language used in the historical documents. So controlled vocabularies are created in a particular space and time, frequently based upon literary warrant. And as a knowledge organization system, they represent the dominant worldview of that particular space and time, which is reflected in the vernacular that is used. Now, I do want to note that there are many challenges to automatic subject representation for full text humanities resources, but these are topics for another day. I did want to acknowledge them though. But this presentation will focus on one particular challenge that I encountered. So here's an example of this vernacular disparity. So say we upload a document, an encyclopedia entry to HIVE, and the keyword extraction algorithm as part of HIVE extracts the word Wahhabis from your document. But when HIVE tries to match the term to a controlled vocabulary, what will the HIVE automatic subject indexing output be if the vocabulary itself does not contain the word Wahhabis? Well, it's not going to be Wahhabis, I can tell you that. So this is a brief snippet from the 7th edition Encyclopedia Britannica entry on Yemen, which has repeated occurrences of the words Wahhabis and Saracen throughout the entry. And when we index this entry using Fast Topical, which is a faceted version of the topics in the Library of Congress subject headings, Wahhabis and Saracens are not in the output. You might be thinking, well, but if those terms aren't used anymore. But the problem is that because of this difference in vernacular, any concepts related to Islam and Muslims aren't represented in this metadata at all for an entry on Yemen. So we have missing concepts that are really important to the entry. And if we search the LC linked data service to double check, we will see that Saracens and Wahhabis, in fact, are no longer listed as authorized terms in the Library of Congress subject headings today. But what if we try to use an historical version of that controlled vocabulary to try and solve this problem. So we're going to take a look at the first published edition of the Library of Congress subject headings, which was published between 1910 and 1914. And I'll refer to it here as the 1910 Library of Congress subject headings. And what you'll see here is that, what do you know, both of the terms, Wahhabis and Saracens, are listed here as authorized terms in the 1910 Library of Congress subject headings. So if we take that historical controlled vocabulary, create a machine-readable version, add it to HIVE, and index using that historical vocabulary version, the term Wahhabis now has a chance of appearing in the output. And you'll see here between these two lists, this is using the contemporary and this is using the historical, that in fact the terms Wahhabis and Saracens did show up in the indexing output when I used it. So say we index this 7th edition entry on Sandrahim, and because it was present in both the encyclopedia entry and the historical vocabulary of the time, the term deformities is retrieved in your metadata. And maybe at this point, the implications are starting to raise your eyebrows a bit in terms of using that term in your contemporary metadata record. So for example, this table provides some examples of terms retrieved in my pilot study that are no longer authorized subject headings in the 2021 Library of Congress subject headings. And this is all very interesting, but what do we do with it? Because I'm sure, as you can see, a lot of these terms that changed are human identity-based terms, some of which are now considered quite offensive. These are great for studying how knowledge was represented at the time, particularly through indexing a knowledge-based humanities corpus like these Encyclopedia Britannica entries. But we don't really want to use deprecated and offensive subject headings in our contemporary metadata records. We definitely don't want to perpetuate ignorant or outdated terms in our digital library catalogs. So what can we do with them? Well, what if we were able to link these historical concepts to their contemporary authorized terms? In theory, for each concept that is represented by a term in the 1910 Library of Congress subject headings, there should be some term in the 2021 Library of Congress subject headings that represents that same concept in some form. It may not always be a one-to-one relationship, but it should be represented somewhere in some form. So here's an example of how 1910 Library of Congress subject heading terms can sometimes be directly traced to its 2021 Library of Congress subject heading equivalent through the listings of earlier established forms. We see here that the word deformities appears as an earlier established form under the 2021 LCSH term abnormalities, human. And the same is true for our term Saracens from the Yemen entry. The term Saracens appears explicitly as an earlier established form in the 2021 authority record for Islamic Empire. Some of these terms, however, are not listed as earlier established forms, even if they were at some point. And in that circumstance, many of these terms can actually be directly traced to its 2021 LCSH equivalent through its listed variant terms in the record. So in this example, batrachia is listed as a variant for the listing amphibians. But sometimes the 1910 term is nowhere to be found in the authority record for any 2021 Library of Congress subject heading term. And this is the case for Wahhabis. It's not listed as an earlier established form for any term. And it's not listed as a variant term, even for the subject heading that is its most likely equivalent. But making that judgment call still requires an educated guess. And this inserts subjectivity, bias, and potentially human error into the process. So where do we find that exact link to fill that missing gap? This is where intermediary vocabulary versions can help to fill in these blanks. such as the 1957 Library of Congress subject headings, which are available through HathiTrust. So we can see here that the term Wahhabis with one H and two E's is now listed as a variant term for Wahhabis with two H's and an I. And this version of the term, as we saw earlier, is listed as a variant term under the 2021 Library of Congress subject heading term Wahhabiyya. And so this allows us to see that the contemporary equivalent for our 19th century term Wahhabis is Wahhabiyya. If we can link these automatically extracted historical concepts to their contemporary counterparts for subject representation in the final metadata record, we can represent essential anachronistic terms extracted from our historical documents using the authorized terms that have replaced them over time. This is just an example. So here's that same table of examples from the 1910 Library of Congress subject heading terms from my pilot study that I showed previously, but now it is listed next to the contemporary authorized equivalent term. So I will go through some of these examples in this table because it's very interesting and because you might start to see some trends among these terms. So we have Mohammedans, but instead of using that, we should now use Muslims. For Saracens, we should now be using Islamic Empire. Wahhabis to Wahhabiyya, Umayyads to Umayyad dynasty, Moors, the race, to Muslims, Gallus to Oromo-African people, Gypsies, Romanis, Ostiaks to Kanti, Uzbeks with a G is now Uzbeks with a K, Malay race turned into Malays, Asian people. Polyzoa is now Bryozoa, Batrachia is amphibians. Elasmobranchi is now this term that I'm sure I will mispronounce, so I won't butcher it. Wounds is now wounds and injuries. Deformities should be represented by abnormalities, human. Idiocy is an example of one in which it's not a one-to-one correlation because idiocy appears as a variant term under two contemporary headings, intellectual disability and also for stupidity, which I will admit I was a little surprised to see that stupidity is a current authorized subject heading. And then we have man should be human beings and woman is women. So at this point, you might notice that the concepts are clustered close together for a reason in this table. We can see that some trends start to form across these concepts. We have 5 concepts related to religion and religious belief, 7 concepts related to nationality and ethnicity. And you'll see in the middle here with the purple that there is some overlap because the terms Umayyads and Moors were specifically used to refer both to religious belief and nationality or ethnicity. So it's in both categories. And we have 3 science-related terms. Also 3 terms that are grouped together loosely as health and medicine, and 2 terms related to gender. But when we look at these clusters at an even more granular level, we see that even more specific trends arise among these clusters of terms. So our religion-related terms are all about Islam. There were a lot of them in my pilot study. And there is a heavy geographic presence of nationality and ethnicity specific to Africa and Asia. Gypsies is an interesting example here because the Roma people are typically associated with Central Europe. However, the Indo-Aryan ethnic group originated in North India and then migrated to Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries and were thought of as nomads. And to this day, and I have personally encountered this, unfortunately, from somebody a Hungarian who was raised in Romania, the term gypsies is sometimes still used by Europeans in a pejorative way to refer to the Roma people who live in their country. And that was a pretty heated discussion. So the next steps for this research are to perform a robust evaluation of this phenomenon to identify trends in this, what I'm calling temporal concept drift, that is apparent across versions of a controlled vocabulary as we index with them, and how these terms changed over time. And I have included this slide here because there is a wealth of literature behind this research in terms of essential concepts and theory. And I, of course, don't have time to talk about it all, but I just wanted to highlight a few key areas and readings specific to knowledge organization systems with respect to power and worldview, infrastructural inversion, and subject ontogeny. And I'd be happy to share this slide later for anyone who is interested in checking out some of these readings. And last but not least, in the months to come, I am going to be looking for evaluators for my dissertation study that is related to this topic. So if you have a background in humanities and information studies, I would be very interested in hearing from you if you would like to participate in the evaluation. It would take place over 2 days, and I would have more details to come. So feel free to reach out to me at this email address. And if you don't catch my email address now, you can always reach out to Christy, and she would be happy to give you my email address to reach out to me as well. So I have a slide of references, and thank you. And I would be happy to take any questions that you might have about this research.
We had 2 questions in the chat from Christine. I don't know if she wants to ask them herself, she can.
Sure.
Okay.
So from your very beginning introduction, Sam, I'm curious if you're currently a full-time PhD student, because you mentioned that you did your master's part-time while working full-time.
Yes, I did the master's full-time while working full-time also, which was a whole, that was an interesting experience.
Sure.
But yes, also a full-time PhD student. Yes.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. And I see your other question.
Yeah.
How did you decide to look at the 1957 Library of Congress subject heading version? Yes. So the reason I am using that particular version is because you can't actually access the full listing of all of the Library of Congress subject headings easily right now online, freely accessible. A lot of these updates were released through supplements, and throughout the early to mid 19th century, that's how, or 20th century rather, that's how a lot of these updates took place, and that is how they take place now. We have our weekly schedules, weekly updates that are sent out through Library of Congress. But the 1957 did a full publication of all of it, all of the concepts and what the changes were, and you can access them through HathiTrust. So I'm sure there are other versions, and I may need to incorporate more versions, but it'll take some more digging around to try to find a full copy of the whole thing, because it may be too much to, look at each individual supplement that came out.
Right. That's why I was trying to figure out how you landed upon the 1957 version, but sounds like easy access.
Yeah, easy access. I mean, we're in a pandemic too, and so it's what's available, what's easily accessible, and what has the full vocabulary. That's the most important one. Right. I mean, I have a printout of the 1910 Library of Congress subject headings, and it's also available through HathiTrust. So that makes that easily available, but not all editions are in that format online right now. So
got it. Good to know. I'm only in my second semester, so I'm new to library science, and actually I must tell you that my professor Stallman, who I'm taking organizing information, suggested that we all attend this, and I can definitely see the connection between your work and what we're working on as our projects in her course right now. So I'm glad I attended. Thank you.
That's fantastic. We love Gretchen at the Metadata Research Center. She was actually a fellow in the LEADS Fellowship Program, which was the fellowship program that preceded leading, which I talked about early on. So yeah, Gretchen, she's great.
And you may have also heard about the leading fellowship through some emails from Lilia. We have two more questions in the chat. One from Eddie. How much progress has been made towards the short-term goal for the project?
That's a great question. So as it stands now, actually recently I generated this. I had access to all of the R through Z entries, which account for about 20,000 of these entries. So, a significant amount of them. And I was able to recently generate the metadata for each of these entries. So they haven't been integrated into the TEI headers for the entries yet, but the metadata has been generated and it's ready to go. It's just a matter of time. Yeah, so we're getting there. It's a lot of work to process all of it, and COVID set things back a little bit in terms of having student assistants at Temple University to help with the processing of all of these materials. So yeah. But we're coming up on having all of them processed very soon, so that's good.
And Jess asks, what first interested you about metadata?
Question. I think I really became interested in metadata during the Masters of Library and Information Science program at Drexel, and I guess what I liked about it was that it's semantics. I mean, I have a humanities background, and so the way that words are used to represent things was very interesting to me, but there's also a technical component to it. And I think I really appreciate things, projects, challenges, solutions at the intersection of technical solutions and semantics.
A personal question, so you can expand a little bit on the technical part. For your research, how much do you need to know about different programming languages and anything else like that?
That's a good question. I will say when I started on the project, I had way less technical expertise than I do now. I used Python when working on this project, and I think when I first started on the project, there were bits and pieces that I could figure out how to do on my own. But it required, in order to really scale this up and evaluate this this situation, this challenge, it really required scaling up my skill set. And so it's been a lot of self-learning. I mean, the PhD program at Drexel does have a data science foundations course, and that was immensely useful. But if you're not applying it in your day-to-day work, it sort of goes in one year, you might remember a few things, and then it goes out the other year. And so it was a lot of, relearning things or adapting bits of code that I learned to the project. So, and then now I think the project just gets cooler and cooler the more you teach yourself in terms of how to write this code to do this. So I've been able to make my job a lot easier studying this problem at a larger scale by scaling up my Python skills. So, but I primarily am just working with Python.
Awesome. Eddie asks, does the HIVE software generate the SQL queries for you, or do you need to construct them yourself?
So the SQL queries take place on the back end of HIVE. That's part of HIVE. All of the normalization and the SQL queries to the vocabulary databases, that's all internal. And so basically, all you do with HIVE is, here's my document, here's the vocabulary I want to use, these are the parameters I've set, and go. And it does the whole process of the natural language processing and the normalization and the SQL query and querying the database. So yeah, nice. I think having access to the backend has been really nice because it's enabled us to explore a machine readable format of the historical vocabulary and working with other historical ontologies as well. So.
Are there any other questions? If you would like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to ask Sam directly or drop them in chat, and I'm happy to read them.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about this. It's very exciting research, and in quarantine, you don't really have as many opportunities to pop your head up and give a presentation about what you've been working on. So yeah, I definitely appreciate the opportunity, Chrissy.
And if anyone does have any follow-up questions, can I just I'll send out your email address if anybody wants to know more.
Yes, please do. Yep.
Cool. And also, if they're interested in being part of your pilot study. Yes.
The actual study, yeah, I'm very enthusiastic about finding some participants who want to get involved. It would be very directly related to this work. So, semantics and how words are being used in a specific resource versus how it's being used in another resource. And so it's just a very interpretation-based human evaluation. So we want somebody who has an information background, but also like more of a humanistic background so that, they get it.
Yeah. All right. I think that we are wrapping up. Thank you so much, Sam. This is awesome. And I'm geekily happy because I finally got to hear a full coherent description of all of your research. So this has been
somewhat coherent.
All right. So
thank you so much.